Dear Thomas, thank you very much for this very nice and clean and clear and very to the point presentation. The questioning section we will organize actually in accordance more or less to the structure of your thesis. So we will divide it into 3 sections, one related to theory, second related to methods, and the last one will be related to the findings, limitations, and implications. And for each section, the examiners will ask questions in turn. Okay, so that's the basic structure. All so right. First we start with the questions about theory, and we invite Katrina to start first.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Thomas, also from my side for a very interesting presentation and also for giving us the opportunity to read your thesis. So there were some really interesting thoughts in there, and we would just like to elaborate on some of the things a little further and ask partly also about like what your thinking is about some issues. So starting with the theory, as Jason pointed out, and you provided us with an overview about the open innovation and different perspectives you can have there. There are various authors who have been writing about this. So maybe if you could give us some background information of how and why did you pick the literature mentioned here. You have a total of 160 almost literature sources, and so why did you pick them? How did you pick them? And maybe also a little reflection on how you did it, and maybe also if I ask you now to do it again, would you do it exactly the same way again, or maybe a little different?
Yeah, well, I picked it I think because, let me start by saying, because it's a relatively new topic. I mean, von Hippel's literature goes back to the 80s, late 80s, and then you build up and then you have Chesbrough and then it explodes. I wanted to pick literature, but I didn't just want to go by citations, because a lot of stuff is happening right now, especially a lot of the studies that I found that had also like a large-scale, multiple approach to open innovation are within the last 4 years. So I wanted to start by finding the key elements, and I used 2 of the most common academic databases, ISI among others. And I found the key journals by citation there by actually just starting to dig into the literature. And then it was sort of like a snowball effect, trying to track where these were then cited and who cited them and who cited them. Sort of like to get an approach both of what was sort of like the most, by saying cited, the most commonly referenced articles, and also getting what was like happening at the very front end of open innovation. Would I have done it differently? Probably yes. I think I got, with the 160 papers, I think I threw too wide a net, I would almost say, because there was a lot that actually didn't make it into references. I mean, if I had been more clear from the very beginning on which direction I wanted to go, I could have narrowed that search down significantly. Yeah.
And would have been there any focus areas you would have rather limited your literature research on? You just said you were very broad.
Yeah. When you say limited, like that I wouldn't have gone that much into. Yeah, I got around a lot, also into the lead user literature and that, and also collaborative innovation and these terms. And I think that I probably, when I see the argumentation that I ended up with, I could have actually stuck more closely to the inbound open innovation theory that Chesbrough proposes, because the changes in perspective to suddenly, like I also ended up writing in the thesis, the changes in perspective to the non-rivalrous aspect of lead users and all of that that I mean, it is not something I actually use in the finished model.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are other aspects you are using in your model where you might have not got too deep into the literature review.
Yeah.
What comes to your mind there? So if we think about what other streams could you have followed if you think about your model?
I'm actually not sure what you are aiming at precisely. I mean, I have the whole external, other external sources. I have this sort of almost a pickup category, and I mean, there is some a lot of research into that, the use of consultancies and stuff like that I actually haven't touched upon that deeply at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually more thinking about other literature streams apart from open innovation, because yes, your overall context is open innovation, but if we look at your model, there are other things you're touching up on, like information processing.
Yes.
You just mentioned the knowledge management. Yeah. So that kind of puzzled me a little bit, why you didn't went down that stream to see what is kind of the current discussion in that field.
Well, I tried, but you could say that because when I went into to begin with, when you dive into the whole information and knowledge theory, it's very complex, and in many cases people also use it almost interchangeably, which is not, like certainly from an information theory perspective, not that good. But I wanted to focus on specific capabilities, and I think that what I would say is that I also wanted to the knowledge aspect, which is very prevalent in the current stream of discussion about these topics, but there is the nice thing about picking information processing and sticking to the information part of it, because market information processing, which is an extension of just information processing when you add the market, actually it goes, if you say that they go from data to information to knowledge in 3 steps, and that is sort of problematic in terms of measurement, right? So I wanted to stick to very strictly to the information part of it and say, okay, do they collect data and do they spread the data? And when also because, which I forgot to mention, was that what they're asked in this data set is they're asked about their NPD portfolio performance in 3 years. So as soon as you get into the knowledge use, you get into sort of a more organic process where it is this really integrated, like the knowledge, the information you get, is that transformed into knowledge that you use for your strategy, that you use for your operation and processes. But that goes beyond the 3-year period, right? That is an ongoing process. So for the terms of the data set, I wanted to stick to that part. Yeah. Okay.
Follow that. Maybe just one last part of my question before I hand it over to Petra. You mentioned in the beginning that you really wanted to look for the new things in the literature. You said there's still a lot going on in open innovation, a lot of surveys coming out in the last 2 years, whatever. So that was really one of your goals in your literature review. Now, if I think about then the way you did it about using citations and using ISI, I might see a little conflict here.
I understand, and that's why also I wanted to track it sort of like downstream. So I also went who referenced who until I sort of found where we are at the moment, right? So I just didn't look at citations. I also said how many citations. I also used the citation to track, so who has referenced this and who has referenced this, to sort of find my way back.
Yeah, but yes, and that does make a lot of sense to me, but as you just said, that more leads us post, right? Like backwards.
But I tried to use it the other way forward by saying that, okay, we can, by knowing which areas I sort of started to focus on, to see if I could actually pinpoint who was referencing them in the newer literature, and seeing if I could find sort of where these sort of topics were going, especially relating to the large sample studies, which were like my key focus area, right? That's where I really tried to see, okay, so who, like Larsen and Salter is a key paper in mine, and I think it's a seminal paper, or it's going to be an open innovation because it really addresses it begins to address some of the gaps, and I tried to extend that. So that was one of the papers I used. So who has adopted this framework, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, over to me. One more, one small question, and then I'll start formally, but related to this. When did you do it? In which year did you do the literature search?
Oh, that was in 2000, and I've added a few that came out really like later, but the main work was done in, I think, 12, 13. Yeah. And then sort of I picked up I have a few references. Jesper came out with a new book, and there were a few studies by Un and Asakawa that came out later, which was like really relevant for mine.
Yeah, just I don't know whether there are rules about repeating something like this, especially in this day and age. When I started my PhD, I remember we had books that we had to go through, but now everything goes so fast. Okay, but now for something different. First of all, thank you for allowing me to read your book. I thought it was very special because the thesis is written in the form of a book rather than a collection of journal articles. And I also did that. I also wrote a book. I think it's a disappearing, but I really like that. It gives the researcher the opportunity to elaborate more on theories and shortcomings, and it can be an advantage. There are also questions that can be related to this, but that I will save to a later point in time. Also, thank you, because when I read your thesis, I was brought back into the world of contingency theory, and I did a lot in that, but that was quite some years ago, so that really brought things back. But I decided to save that for the methodology section. So for the theory part, I have a specific question about the whole concept of the level of uncertainty.
Yeah.
You already bring it up in the first chapter. I have a little bit of a feeling of jumping to conclusions when you go from level of uncertainty to market innovativeness. And I'll try to explain that a little bit more in detail. You say already on page 6, since the ability to deal with uncertainty is a core concept of information processing theory, we include the level of market innovativeness in our model. Big jump. Okay. Because I know that in the next chapter you do say a little bit more about this uncertainty, but I'm thinking in this part of the thesis, what about concept of ambiguity? For example, because you also look at more radical innovation and higher degrees of novelty, that's also relevant. I would have expected more about that in this part of the thesis, and how would that be related to market innovativeness, etc. Can you elaborate a little bit about this specific form of uncertainty
that I'm using? That I'm using? Or
no, why didn't you devote more words or a section in your theoretical part about the different forms of uncertainty, like and especially ambiguity, because that's something different. And if you then relate that to market innovativeness.
Yeah, well, I'm not that familiar with the ambiguity literature, but I mean, because I'm so I'm so thoroughly entrenched in the new product development. What can we call it? Not just literature, but also sort of like the project part of it, right? Yeah. I think the newness of the product is the sort of like the key element here. And I think, as far as I remember, ambiguity is a broader term, right? So actually, for keeping the model for keeping the research sort of like on point to like developing new products. That was why, excuse me, that was why I chose to focus that way, the way I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I asked this, and we will probably come back to that later on when we go to the discussion section, because you know, uncertainty and risk,
Yeah.
those are things that are almost tangible.
Close
You
to,
don't
yes.
know things,
Yeah.
and then you know what you don't know. You can,
Yes.
but higher up, when it's really novel and a high degree of technological innovativeness,
Yes.
it may be that it's even, and that there comes this notion of ambiguity. You don't know how to interpret it even.
Yeah.
You don't know. So and if you don't address that
Yeah.
in the
And so-
theoretical section, it's a bit dangerous to say, okay, and then we'll go to market innovativeness.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I can definitely see your point. That you can say that because also a lot of the uncertainty element I draw from the information processing, right? Saying that
Yeah.
I don't use it directly, no. But I mean I have the element of it in there because I try to stick more closely to the information processing, which is also actually market information processing come from information processing theory, which is also like the key concept of information processing is eliminating uncertainty. So that is why I sort of stick in that ballpark, because I think to some extent I think the information processing theory addresses that aspect strongly. I mean. That you incorporate the information actually to address uncertainty that you're facing. Yeah, so that was a choice to stick in that particular part of the field. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll give it over to you.
Okay, good. So Thomas, first please accept my compliment. Nice job in the presentation, and then you also made a pretty clear argument when you are presenting your hypothesis, presenting your findings, and elaborating on your implications.
Yes.
In this section of the questions, it's mainly, I think, Katarina's question is the guiding overall question. We are all trying to, let's say, give you some guidance or pushing you a little bit to think about any additional relevant literatures, theories that you probably didn't consider in the journey of writing. One thing that Petra pointed out is the consideration of uncertainty as a construct.
Yeah.
What I'm going to ask you about is, I start with. You mentioned many times that one of the key paper is Lawson Salter 2006, and you also have the Katila Ahuya paper and my paper 2009.
Yes.
And then you also clearly mentioned in your discussion that over-searching is actually one of the potential problems. You're actually pretty much aware of the other side of the story, which is, on the one hand, when you collaborate with external partners, it will be wonderful if you get all the additional resources, ideas, and knowledge, and then you can use for innovate.
Yes.
But the other side, downside of collaborating, over-searching as you call it, is because there are costs attached to it, right?
Yeah.
So in the literature, it's impossible that you miss it, that there is a downside of overdoing the external collaboration.
Yeah.
What are the theoretical foundation behind it? What are the key, the rationale behind it? And then I would also ask you why, at least I didn't see clearly in the theoretical chapter, you've been given some sound argument why you didn't consider the downside. You only use the over-searching argument after you get the findings, right?
Yeah,
to argue why you got it. But
Yes.
at the beginning, this part of the literature, have you considered it? And then what's your consideration here?
For the literature, I think, it is absolutely not very clear in the literature review. But yes, I did consider it because, as Lawson and Salter mentioned it quite briefly, but then you go to the Katila and Afua paper. And I mean, it is the aspect of that it's both costly. You correct me if I'm going in the wrong direction, please. But it's both costly to search for them, so there is a cost associated with finding the right collaborators. That's part of our search, which becomes increasingly more difficult the less you know about your product. And then there is also the depth aspect, right? That the more you try and get out of them, there's also a cost associated with that. The interaction itself is costly. There's some resources associated with that. So, I mean, that was the two aspects that I actually focused on, because I think also that I mean, that's the breadth and depth again, that's very related to the whole intensity construct that I create. Yeah, so are there anything, I mean, that was the...
No, I'm just asking, this line of literature could have been considered in the literature review stage.
Yeah.
No? That's my
Yeah.
point. Okay.
It should be.
Yeah. Then I move on to another question, which is kind of related. It's addressing the research gap that you identified.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's immediately related to the contribution you're supposed to make. Well, you find the gap and you make your contributions, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the major contributions that you claimed, and number one, is that you recognize, according to your argument, saying in the literature there are a lot of studies talking about the breadth and depth. Also, we all have a lot of the studies already get into the details of the impact of collaborating with a particular type of partner, given it supplier, customer, whatever, and then what's the influence on the innovation performance in general somehow. And you say it's fine, it's give us a lot of understanding, but my way of having an integrated measure, no matter if you really see the intensity, the measure you use is a depth or breadth, that's another discussion. But you use a very integrated measure, combining all the sources together, using a single factor load. This particular way of measuring the construct, even though I'm still talking about theory, I'm addressing the theoretical foundation here. If the literature itself has already developed into a stage that very detailed discussion about the breadth, depth, and all different kind of single sources for collaborators, and all these things have been very well established, what is the advantage or disadvantage to use your approach to aggregate everything together as one single measure? What will be the potential danger given the conceptual structure framework that you're using?
All right. Well, the potential danger is that with the depth and breadth separated, right, you get a level of clarity to what's happening, right? You get a conceptual understanding of if it's with how much you collaborate and with on the depth that you collaborate. So that's a strength, and I don't get that. What I think is in this study is the strength of doing it my way, is that when you have it together, the intensity of external collaboration, especially because I try to go to, actually instead of going more focused, I try to take a sort of a step away from the open innovation and say, let's look at it across industries. And I think in that approach, I think we get how should I formulate it? We get a general measure that is very useful for actually looking at, as I say, the intensity, like how much do your efforts into this actually cost, right? So it is actually an attempt to take a step back. And I think depending on what you're trying to do, also you could draw that to the limit, my own limitation, depending on how you want to address like future studies. It is very individual of which approach I would choose. But I think in this case where I'm trying to get an overview of how this actually impacts when you don't separate, when you don't choose the industries, but when you like take a large sample and look at it, I think the intensity is a good measure to actually capture the resource that you actually use.
Let me follow up with what you're saying, depending on what you're going to do. And what you did in your thesis is one of the most interesting construct is market innovativeness.
Yeah.
Right? One of your hypotheses is even saying when the market innovativeness is very high, very radically new into the market, then this collaboration has its impact, which will be weakened.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Here, I'm just trying to bring this up to your discussion to you. What will be the potential danger of seeing them as a whole? Because your argument is saying if you collaborate too much with customers, you get the inertia, you get it too much because customers never tell you exactly what's the next radical move, right? So that's saying, that's why it's going to weaken the impact from collaboration to innovation, right?
Yes.
But because you're aggregating everything together, what about the collaboration with universities, competitors in that situation?
So your point, if I'm following you, is that I miss some of what's happening in the individual with the individual, because they are also in their nature different, right? Collaborating with the customer is different than collaborating with supplier, which is different than collaborating with the university. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's absolutely true. And I think what I do think is that those studies that look at one or the other are actually, in many cases, maybe not so much with competitors. It seems to be a little hard to get a fix on whether or not it's good or bad. But certainly with universities and suppliers and customers, there seems to be some very clear indicators for a positive effect. But I think that's a bit besides my scope, right? Because I wanted to see a general effect on these firms that potentially have many collaborators at the same time. So, yeah.
But at the same time, you want to be more specific when looking at the market innovativeness as a specific situation, right? So you have. I just want to pinpoint that there might be a danger of integrating everything when you are trying to specify different conditions. Right?
So is it that I make a general construct with intensity, but that I have a more specific construct with market innovativeness? Is that where you see the?
Because market innovativeness is a very specific contingency that you are trying to specify in your model, right?
Yeah.
This has implications to the choices for other constructs here, how you operationalize it.
Yeah.
Right? Your main argument saying market innovativeness is negatively moderating because if you lock in too much into market customers' insights, etc., you cannot innovate to right? But then your main independent variable is aggregating every partners together. That doesn't distinguish these nuances to relationship. It's a potential disadvantage, I would say.
Yes, definitely. And I would say that the only thing I can say, and it's not as such it's just to clarify, is that I chose market innovativeness specifically because the actors are, like the firm is definitely interested in the market, and many of the actors are also sort of involved in the market, right? So it becomes, that's why I chose that. But I see your point, yes. And I don't know if you would advise addressing it by including other. I mean, I do control for technological innovativeness. Of course, there's also organizational innovativeness or environmental innovativeness you could look for. But would you include more variables?
At this stage, I would be happy enough that you already recognize there might be potential disadvantages.
Yes, of course.
Okay, I exhausted my question. Thank you. Yeah. And then we can move on to the methods part. Huh? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Or should I
thought
start?
we should end with that.
Oh, that's true. Okay, so I start. All right, it's me again. What I'd like to do is, if you could go on slide 22, where you introduce your model. Oh, no. Why did I write 22? Whatever.
Is it
28, I think.
the whole one you want to say?
Ah, yes.
Yes.
28, thank you. Gosh. All right. So now, as you also, I think, mentioned like with a half sentence, this is a little complex. So we have various moderating and mediating effects, and we split them, and so looking at them, and I mean, you found your result, so it's fine the way it is. But what I would expect is that this is not probably the model you started with, and there might have been a lot of models on your way. Yes. So again, if you could just share some of your experience with us of what other models or what other relationships did you test, did you have in mind, reflecting on the model like it is right now, does it make sense to have that many moderating effects? Are you really happy with it? Of course you are, that's fine, yeah, but again, maybe like a little reflection of, for us to learn more about the genesis of this model.
All right, yeah, definitely. Well, it's sort of, what shall I say, it's sort of, it grew, right, because I was, what I was initially actually really interested in was the last ones. I mean, I wanted to see when you have a lot of intensity of collaboration, and you have some firm level capabilities, and you moderate and you moderate again, what happens, right? But but then I also, to some extent, saying, okay, there are some relationships here I want to examine. So I actually almost had to go backwards and say, okay, but I need to build up these relationships. So, and I've also tried, I've tried a lot. So I've also tried different variants of performance to see how that affected it. And what I would say now is that I'm happy with the model the way it is, because, as Petra said, when it's a book, you have more opportunities to go into like a lot of hypotheses. I think that for example, you have asked me before about like knowledge management perspective, that having that perspective, like the third step of this variable, also increases the complexity of the model, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it also becomes much more difficult to guide through it, right? I like this end result also because that I did actually get a story, I think, that makes sense also from previous literature. Yes, what I also what I mean, are there any variables you would, because I tried out a lot of different variations, right? Different variations of market innovativeness and different variations on performance, and and I think what I would I would say here that it's really, what I like about the model is that it actually sort of pinpoints oversearch, and it also I end up being able to tell something about how you can mitigate that. And I think that's a very interesting story. And by no way am I claiming that is the only way to mitigate oversearch. There might be other variables you could use. However, I think the conceptual build of sticking to information processing and that whole way of thinking about uncertainty and mitigating it actually creates a very strong framework. So that would sort of be my...
Okay, yeah. Thank you. A question that came to my mind when I read your thesis was, if we look at the capabilities, and here specifically you looked into market or information processing. Now, doesn't that somehow correlate with the intensity of collaboration, or not at all? Did you look into that?
I did look into it. I have, of course, there are some minor correlations in the data, but nothing that was a problem from sort of the integrity of the regression model. But it, I mean, yeah, it does stand to reason, of course, that from the literature you could expect that people who were good at this were also good at this, right? That's
And
what I'm testing.
one thing enforces the
The
other,
other.
probably.
Yeah.
Yes. That's
But
good.
I mean, the only way I can say that is that was a fear, and that's also why I did check the correlations for making sure that I didn't have some potential problem.
Right.
Yeah.
You want to add?
Yeah, I think it's a pattern that Katarina starts more generic hint, and I get into more specific examples.
I'm good at that.
We are a
good.
good team.
Katarina was asking you how other alternative models, things you've been trying out, and I had when I was reading your thesis, I had two potential alternative models that I thought could be interesting to try out. I tried to share it with you, and then want to hear how do you think about it. Okay?
Yes.
One thing is, again, Lawson-Salter, 2006.
Yes.
What they found is the breadth and depth actually has a substitution relationship with the internal R&D, which is the standard measure for absorption capacity.
Yes.
Meaning, if a company collaborates a lot externally,
Yeah.
they probably don't have to do that much R&D anymore, and vice versa, right? Okay. And now you say you are using information processing as a measure for the absorptive capacity.
And not as a measure for actually.
Exactly, but it's an internal structure, internal
And
capability,
capability,
internal
right.
processing kind of thing. Is it possible that they also have a substitutional kind of effect? Maybe not, maybe yes, but have you considered it? And another thing is, now you are using it as a moderator. But if I see the information processing as a dynamic capability perspective, capabilities are probably need to be in action, that is in response to the challenges that are imposed from the situation, the external collaboration situation.
Yeah.
So would it also make sense that if a firm is collaborating very intensively with a lot of external collaborators, they are required to update and further develop their information processing, which in turn lead to the enhanced new PD performance. If that's a logic could be possibly followed, then could also be in the mediation model.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to force
No,
you to do this. It's just some thoughts I came up. What do you think about these different alternatives?
Okay, I'll try and start from the beginning, and I might have to ask you to remind me of all parts. First of all, the Lawson-Salter result, I think, is intuitively, when you think about it, also from the literature, that their breadth and depth can sort of substitute the R&D intensity. It's actually one of the problems with absorptive capacity literature in general, I think, is that it's very hard to see when you create sort of a hypothesis between this link, if the firms doing the absorptive capacity, okay, they spend a lot of money on internal R&D, and then you see that they're better at collecting information, right? But there might also be a case that what we're seeing is actually that that the reverse is actually happening. Maybe that because they, we can't really separate if the internal R&D spending actually leads to more external collaboration. I mean that's really difficult to see in an interaction like that. So therefore, I say that market information processing is inherently a different variable than absorptive capacity. And I think what I'm advocating is that we should move away from absorptive capacity, maybe not as a conceptual framework, but until there are better measures to capture it than just R&D intensity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would argue that I don't see the same problem here because it's inherently a different kind of construct. Also, what was the second part? There was something about...
what about the potential mediation model? Not interacting, but mediation model. You know? So, intensity leads to information processing leads to performance.
Yeah. But I don't think you can say actually that intensity necessarily leads to information processing capabilities.
No, that's why we need to test.
Yeah. So it's an interesting model, but I don't think, it's an interest because then you would have into this intensity external polarization. Yeah, maybe it could be, but in market information processing, in and of itself, is has an effect, and it might. I mean, there might not be any actual relationship with intensity of external collaboration. You can do market information processing without being actually that much engaged in intensity of external collaboration, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, one potential argument could say, because of this cross-sectional data, it's more dangerous to use mediation model because that's one of the possible. But it's okay, good. Yeah, Petra, you have.
Yeah. Okay. Something completely different. I said already that I would come back to the contingency theory.
Yes.
I could also have asked you a lot of questions about that for the theoretical part, but I chose to mainly focus on the methodological implications. Now, before I go into a little bit of a mini lecture, as Jason said, about it, let me say that I understand, of course, you didn't do what I'm going to propose, but let's try if we can think about that.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. So already in section 2.5 you start talking about contingency theory.
Yeah.
And I looked at the type of theories that you then cite. And I think you mainly cite from Donaldson. And the others that you cite are people that look into NPD and then use contingency thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So there's a lot of different types of theories in contingency theory. And which you didn't read. And I noticed that you stick with this deterministic approach from Donaldson. He says, well, okay, if the contingencies change, the structure has to be changed. And he also he comes from a stream of thinking in contingency theory that think that, okay, we can find the right solution somewhere. Yeah, but there's a lot of other thinking about it. And that has to do with choice and equifinality and dynamic fit. And things like that. And there are more ways leading to Rome, even, yeah? Okay. And the reason that a number of scholars, like for example Andrew van de Ven, also went that way was also that they thought that the way of researching into this type of contingency theory has a lot of drawbacks, or especially limitations. And so I would like to quote now from one of the papers from Dreesen and van de Ven, 1985. So it's not new, huh? Yeah. And it goes like this. Studies that adopt the selection and interaction definitions of fit tend to focus on how single contextual factors affect single structural characteristics. And how these pairs of context and structure factors interact to explain performance. This reductionism treats the anatomy of an organization as being decomposable into elements that can be examined independently. The knowledge gained from each element can then be aggregated to understand the whole organizational system. So when I read this to you, it's typically, I think, what you try to do, eh?
Yeah.
11 hypotheses, and then try to aggregate that. And some of your findings must have been a little bit disappointing.
In what sense?
Because the hypotheses were not confirmed, for example.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so if you really go into this contingency theory thinking, you also have to go into look into their other different methodological choices. Eh?
Yeah.
And what they, for example, one of the things that they propose is a systems approach, which reacts against reductionism. And I will skip all the details, but it comes down to it that they say, okay, why don't you go into some sort of pattern finding
Yeah.
and formulate a number of ideal configurations, for example, that consist of characteristics of all the context and the structure and the performance elements, and try to work with that. Yeah? And I think to a very small extent, your hypothesis 5A and B might be an example of some sort of a pattern that you might predict. Eh?
At the pattern that it will.
Yeah,
go
because
down.
it combines more than one.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, with your data, that you look into finding patterns of all your different elements instead of just, checking 11 hypotheses?
But I find patterns instead.
Yeah. So, for example, and you combine high intensity of external collaboration with certain forms of information generation and information dissemination and degree of innovativeness, and then that would always be high performance. So then the firm would know what to do.
Yeah,
Those type of things.
I think that you can, especially because I did remove some outliers, right? So in the sample I actually end up having, you actually only have firms that have a relatively high NPD performance. So
yeah, that's one way to do it. Eh? You just pick out the top 20% or so, and then you say, okay, must be the ideal configuration.
And I think in my data set, because I didn't pick out the top 20%, I removed a few, right? And that's because I think the firms that are in my sample are, in general, let's just say it that way, firms that rely a lot on new product development.
Yeah, but why can't you then come up with the top 20%?
Oh, but I could come up with the top 20%.
Yeah, and then look at their configurations and see what the patterns are.
Yeah,
that's what because that would be a novel way of approaching it. Also, methodologically speaking, you would then have to look at distance between the ideal profile and the actual profile.
And the actual profile.
Yeah.
Yes, that could be approached. Then you would probably have some stronger managerial implications also for what what you should actually do, right? Because I think while the contribution of my study is not really on the theoretical side, it's on the I got some new findings. That's one of my main. I created a new approach to doing stuff, but it's very hard to get from that to managerial implications. So by having a model where you go for a measurement against some ideal scenario, then it might actually be easier to create that. Yeah.
We agreed that we would now have a natural transition to the discussion and findings. Eh?
I have one more.
You have one more on? Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
I thought I should go on. Okay,
okay.
Go in.
A small clarification thing. And on page 98, I know you didn't design the questionnaire yourself. That's okay. It's a clarification thing.
Okay.
It's mentioned that the top management, CEOs,
Yeah.
heads of R&D or CTOs, they answered about the NPD portfolio performance questions, right? And on the other hand, these NPD team members, they answered all the questions about the information you use for control variables and the independent constructs. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So based on this information, I'm assuming the measure for market innovativeness was also answered by the NPD team members. Is it correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Good. My practical experience tells me that if you go to any large companies, any particular R&D any engineer who's a part of a particular new NPD project, if you ask him at the portfolio level of the whole company, because this market innovativeness are the questions, is a portfolio level of the overall market innovativeness of all the products or services they're introducing during the last 3 years, something like that, right?
Yeah.
How reliable it is to ask the team members to give in rating about the market innovativeness of the entire portfolio?
Well, I think to some extent it's quite reliable because you're asking people who were involved in the last 3 years about the products they were actually developing. So I guess what you're asking is if they have the broad.
Do they have an overview of
external
everything?
perspective.
Yes. My experience is probably they only know the project that they've been working on, but not exactly the overall thing.
No, I mean that is a concern. I would say though that there are since we are asking dedicated NPD team members, I mean people who work with this continuously, I would argue that they're probably pretty aware of the development of the product that's going on in the firm. So I think reasonably, you can argue that they would have a pretty good idea. And especially also because we ask not only one NPD team member, we ask in most cases 5 of them. So from the team, right? So I think we get a pretty decent measure by that, because it's not like we have for the NPD portfolio performance. We ask one man, right, for each firm. Here we ask like a group of people engaged in NPD, not necessarily from the same project, but as long as they're engaged in new product development. So I think that sort of addresses that to some extent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thanks. Yeah. Then we move on to.
You have more on the methodology, Katarina?
Well, maybe just briefly, because now I'm rethinking it, and I still slightly disagree, but that doesn't really matter here right now. And now, if I think about the intensity of external collaboration, you measured that with one item, right? To what extent is the intensity of external collaboration, to a small extent, to a large extent?
Yes.
I do have some concerns here, because again, you have the people working on that collaboration and just telling them, well, is it very intense or not? Can you maybe elaborate a little more to soothe my concerns? That you say, oh no, that's quite fair. Because for me, maybe just from my perspective, if I talk to an engineer and he says, oh, we have a really intense collaboration, and then I ask this person, so what exactly do you do? And then he says, well, we're exchanging emails like once a week. And I talk to another engineer and he says, well, no, the collaboration is really not that intense. We meet once a week and we whatever. So I think that there is quite a subjective bias to how intense you judge a collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, because it's basically a measure. I mean, we do address it in some ways because we ask about every aspect, like customer, competitor, and we say how much do you use them, a lot or not at all, right? Yeah. Of course, there's a subjective in there, a subjective part of their answer, right? But at least, again, by having several team members that we draw from, we do get sort of like an average across what they believe, instead of just relying on one. And I think when you do a cross-sectional Likert scale study, that is making sure that you have enough respondents from each firm is probably, in this type of study, one of the few ways you can address that, right? Then if you really wanted to address that, I think you have to be much more fine-grained in how they use them. I mean, definitely, so that it's not up to them to actually, and then you take sort of like an average of what they all say, and you go, okay, there's sort of like, they use them this much. So that would be, I think, to address that, I would use a completely different approach, actually, because then I would go in and look at like what type of information. Is it face-to-face meetings? Is it written meeting? I mean, yes. That would solve that problem. Yes. But I think in a cross-sectional study like that, it would always sort of there will always be like it goes through it around, right? I mean, because it is very subjective.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
What's happening?
That is a signal.
Oh, whoa, we lost him.
Okay.
Now we move on. No?
Can I go
Yeah?
on?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll move on to
turn.
the
That's
off
okay.
or
We
something.
don't need more slides.
Now we have the natural bridge.
Yes.
Yes.
That's only based on your intuition. Yes.
Okay. Let me start this the topic of your discussion and also the future. What you might suggest or might do to further even the field. By citing from our own preliminary statement, the thesis claims to make a number of contributions, and one, I think, very important contribution for you is that you have this aggregated measure of external collaboration.
Yeah.
That's a very important one. Intensity adds more value to our knowledge about search breadth and depth based on the excellent literature, because the author, you argue that such an aggregated measure combines both breadth and depth, and it means to consider multiple external partners simultaneously. And you just a little while ago, you also explained that you are actually taking a step back, and by taking that step back, adding more insight, or that was your intention.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, but when you look at your findings, actually, I was wondering, especially because some of your hypotheses didn't
Yeah, there were no
go
results at all.
the way you thought they would go. In hindsight,
Yeah.
was this actually the right approach or the right way of working to aggregate this breadth and depth? Because and the natural relationship is with this whole idea of pattern finding. Because maybe there are so many people already that addressed, for example, the topic of portfolios, which combination of external parties to collaborate with, for example.
Yeah.
A lot of, already since 2005, you know them, you cite them. So while you said, well, I think it may not be necessary to look into with whom, but just the intensity.
Yeah.
I think to some extent, and especially with high innovativeness and in more radical innovation, it might matter.
With whom?
Yeah, with
Yes.
whom? Yeah, it might also. That's breadth. It might also matter in terms of depth, maybe the degree of novelty. Well, it will, but also per phase. Maybe in a certain phase of the NPD process, you will find a different configuration than in the next phase. And just, you couldn't have known all that before you did the research. But I would really be very interested to hear you go one step further. And actually you already said something like, okay, then I would have done a different study.
Yeah.
But I think now it may be time for different studies and to combine everything that's already known. And what would be your thoughts about, for example, looking into the differences of intensity, breadth, and depth per phase?
Excuse me, per
Per phase, so the first phases of the
per phase,
NPD.
yeah. So idea, prototyping, and
yeah. And what type of new research approach would you then advise?
well, I definitely, if you're going per phase and want some interesting
To start with,
there, let's start there.
yeah.
Then I wouldn't use my intensity of external collaboration, because I think then you would really hit down into that universities are, in general, from the theory, advised to be added early, because they are not of that much value later on. They're not into the whole exploitation of an innovation, right? Whereas suppliers seem to be pretty decent in the as long as you're working in the whole supply chain part, and customers are maybe also more valuable early on. Or that sort of depends a little, but I would definitely split it up then, because it seems like,
Or at least identify with whom.
yeah, with whom exactly?
Because
And
I don't agree not to do anything with the intensity, because that was a good idea.
Yeah. But I think that you would run into the problem. The intensity part you would keep, but I would still try and have a sort of divided, so I could see what is happening in the different phases. If you just divide it into like 3 phases, the ideation phase and the prototyping phase and then sort of a launch phase, it is, I would say, based on what we already know, it is almost certain that these different actors would be relevant at different aspects, right?
Yeah.
So
but you could still look at the relationship with information processing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I would still I would keep information processing, and maybe also, if I'm just like thinking how I would structure a conceptual model, I would maybe actually stick to my doing information processing only with the information part and keeping knowledge out a little bit to begin with. That would be one approach. So you get a very clear idea how the ability to actually work with these people in the different phases and collect information from them actually works. So that could be one approach I would...
and would it be longitudinal research?
Well, it's always nice with longitudinal studies where you can see something over time, right? And
but in this particular case, would that have big advantages over what you did? Because you want to go...
when you're talking about these phases, it sort of like depends on which type of NPD products we are talking about. Because we just asked them about 3 years of their new product development, and for some products that's more than enough, right? From start to finish is within that span, and for other products, more that involves maybe more like basic research and doing something really new. You're out into a field where 3 years is not enough. So maybe also create some sort of try and look for what kind of project it is. Now I'm thinking.
But that's what I asked.
Yeah. So in some way, trying to figure out if you could, a radical innovation would arguably probably take longer, but it would also be data-wise very hard to like pick who is the radical innovation from the beginning of a project, right? So.
But it's all not impossible.
No, you could start by saying who's trying to, who's aiming for something. Whether or not it will be a success, that's another story, right? But then you would also have to consider the success measure you use in the end. Yeah.
And that's an excellent point, because you touched you touched on that in your thesis as well. So what are the ways to choose or measure the dependent variable, especially in the case you just described?
Well, I think actually it's a strength of my study that I choose a very conservative dependent variable, that I look for some hard measures. I think that makes it easier for my respondent to actually give some clear indication of what's happening when you ask him, did it increase market as a sales revenue? However, there's also an argument could be made that intense external collaboration in general might not be affecting these aspects directly, but might actually affect, what can we say, like more customer perception of the new product. And that in turn will, as the next step, affect performance maybe, right? So like the hard financial performance measures. So you could also have a performance measure, a dependent variable that focused more on customer succession or market adoption, those types of measurements. And that would be, I think, it would be a different type of study, but also relevant, because then you're just saying that, that external collaboration can affect more than just like performance, right?
Definitely. Yeah, thank you. You started your presentation by remembering this first discussion you had with the vice president of whatever innovation management, right? So now, is he here with us?
No, he's not.
Okay. So if he would be in the audience, what would you recommend to him? Because you do make some recommendations, also managerial implications, but for me they are quite generic actually. It's more like, increase your search or something. So really specifically, he's sitting there in the audience saying, well, Thomas, well done. You spent 4 years of your life. Now, what exactly can I do with your thesis? What should I do tomorrow if I go back to my company?
I would then ask you first, because I would say that the reason why they are quite generic is that the nature of my study doesn't lend itself well to practical managerial implications. I think. I mean, I have some capability related issues that I also address, but I have to be very careful when I'm moving around with these very specific variables, like what I can actually say.
Okay, but now it's not written, so you can speak openly.
So, yeah, okay.
Okay, yeah.
So if I also would draw on like literature in general, what we know about this topic.
No, I want
okay.
you to reflect on what you have written in 225 pages and give now some specific recommendations. What should he do? What does he get out of your thesis?
Well, I think what he gets is that what they didn't have, in my opinion, was actually capable. They hadn't thought about what to do with all that information. I mean, they started a lot of projects. They created an open innovation platform, and then they got 160 ideas, and then nobody ever wrote anything again. And they were okay. That was expensive.
Right.
And I think they created one small banking product they could sell to 100 people. They were very disappointed about that.
Surprising.
So I would definitely say that they actually that they might consider how they actually conducted intensity with external collaboration, and that maybe when you have a product like he said, and I don't think he's wrong in saying that sort of like almost a territory need for people. I mean, it's a house, it's money, it's them. That customers might not be the right people. I think that what I would advise then is that there are other aspects that they were very careful about, especially that they figured that suppliers they do buy other financial products. I mean, a mortgage broker doesn't invent it. They are in contact with other financial institutions. That the whole thing that nobody understands our context, because we are under Danish regulation, that they are actually jumping a step too far and saying that suppliers and universities maybe also, I mean, they do recruit from universities almost exclusively from the finance. There are research going on there. And if they actually took the time and the effort to build these capabilities that I talk about, actually sit down and think, how do we identify the right researcher or the right supplier? How do we then collect information? What do we need to get out of them, and in what form do we need it? So can they do something, or do we have to translate it or transform it? And then especially thinking, how do we disseminate it through the rest of the organization? Because a lot of what they met was also the not invented here syndrome, basically because as soon as they went outside the new product development team, everybody was saying, well, the customers said that, and they don't know anything about like financial products. They just buy them or take a loan, right? So I do think I would encourage him to look for the right type of collaborator, and I mentioned like two here now, and then work on the firm level capability. And when you look how my variables are built, from that you can draw some examples and say, okay, maybe the systemization of selection processes, the systemization of collection processes, and the systemization of dissemination processes. That might be like the key for my study. Not having that is maybe the reason why.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good. Are we good in time?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I think, have we exhausted all the questions so far? I think it's okay.
Go.
I'm just listening to your conversation here about the implications, managerial implications. I have the same thoughts. Like, I noticed you are clearly aware the shortcomings of the data structure itself, and then if you had a second chance, you will be very much interested in providing much more nuanced information in terms of the process, in terms of what type of collaborator, etc. You do recognize that's more important for the managers rather than giving them an aggregated package,
Yeah.
right? That's something
yes.
we all recognize. Good. Right. Good. So again, even with the limitation of your of your data, there are some you could have played differently. You do have different kind of collaborators. You do have different kind of performance measures.
Yeah.
You are now integrating sales, market share, revenue, all things together. They're also different.
Yeah.
You also decided to combine them together.
Yes.
That was the choice. I hope that it's deliberately made.
Sorry.
And then by the end of the study, maybe you realize okay, if I had had a chance to do it again, I could provide much richer managerial implications if I do it in a different way. I hope this is something we have more or less reached the common understanding.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, definitely. I think the scope of my my thesis in general is very academic in that sense.
Yeah.
I mean,
Good.
Yeah, question? Okay, this was not something that I planned to ask, but as we were talking, and especially when you were answering Katarina's question and being so careful about what to say to the, I thought, well, but you don't have any problems in being very normative about what literature says, eh?
yeah.
But literature doesn't speak, you know. So it's always an observation from what happens. And I would like to discuss a little bit, we have time, one example. And I have different page numbers, so, but it's somewhere at the very end of paragraph 6.3. You say something like, from a contingency perspective, the more collaborators involved in the NPD project and the higher the level of collaboration required, the more likely it is that the integration of the external sources will require changes to the firm's structure. And you go on, you say, well, okay, the higher the intensity of external collaboration, the more likely it is to require changes in the networks and the communication structure, etc., etc. So, how do I see this in practice? Firms are just going to change structure and change back again because of what dictates them to do that? How would it work?
How in practice?
Yeah.
I think it's hard to observe in practice because I think it's an ongoing process. I mean, it's an ongoing process, and I think when you're talking about how information sort of shapes the firm, it does that in several different ways, like in the way they absorb information changes. So you would see it in practice probably from the systems they have, maybe both in terms of how they spread it, like, and how they collect it. And you would see it in practice also maybe like that they actually invest in systems to do it.
Yeah, but that's much less normative than you write it down
Yeah.
here. Eh? Here you say it sounds like so they have to do that.
Okay.
Eh?
Yeah.
But what you're actually saying, you expect that, and most probably, especially in the more successful firms, that it will happen, that there will be adaptation.
Adaptation both in terms of structure and assets, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dynamic fit,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to be careful with that, eh? Because if I would read this, being that person that's not here now, I think, oh, he has the answer. Somewhere there would say what the structure would be in this and this set. That's the extreme form of determination. Eh? That's what we don't do that.
No.
But still, you have a lot of paragraphs saying things like this, very determined.
Yeah.
But what is more helpful is the other paragraphs, and they are lesser in number, or fewer in number, that say, okay, but if a little bit more down the line other things happen, then it's okay. Eh?
Yeah.
So that helps, and that can be translated in more specific guidelines for that person and all the others that you would want to think to.
And it might also, at least as you say, be more in line with the whole fit idea, that it changes and you adapt, and changes and adapts, right?
Yeah, but it's dynamic, and you would like to have more of a robust structure. Because otherwise, you go berserk and you will be only internally focused.
Oh.
on the structure, and that's not the order of things. It's outside where it happens first, eh?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Other.
Okay. 5 minutes more.
Yeah,
I have one.
I also have one last one.
Very quick.
Okay.
It's not it's just to know for the future research, etc. It would be good to know. Actually, it could also beneficial for you as well. I know there must be reasons why you chose this this data set. It must be advantage for using this DK and Austrian and data. And while you're doing the research, maybe during the process you find out some additional information would be nice to have, which you cannot find the data for constructing the other kind of variables that you need to use. Have you ever considered taking some complementary information sources from the CIS data from Denmark and Austria? And would it be beneficial if you want to continue the research journey if you want to take something?
Well, the CIS data set, I think in general, I've never actually used it. I mean,
okay. That's fine.
I mean, so I haven't done any calculations with it ever. But it's very used. I mean, almost half of the studies I cite as large sample studies use community innovation survey in one form or another. So without actually having, without actually knowing like what is there in there as a besides. One thing I would have liked to address maybe is in the dataset that I have right now. I don't think actually that I would have liked to also address the sort of for model completeness again. I would have liked to actually also have looked a little bit about the R&D intensity of solvent capacity, because I attack it in my PhD and say that there is a limited value to this, right? So I was considering if there was a way I could actually, instead of doing it as a theoretical critique of their approach, which I could actually include it and test it somehow. But I mean, in general, I think this data set has a few advantages over the CIS data set. First of all, I think that I also critique some of the uses of the CIS in the PhD by saying that I think it's Tether, that he actually includes all the firms that also answer, I don't have any innovation. I mean, so, but in this project, I mean, the strong point is that we actually do know that they are, and we can also see it, that they have a very, I mean, the mean of the variable is quite high, that we can see that they are very innovative, right? So in that sense, I mean, also I would guess I would need to really do a thorough comparison. I would need to match sort of the firms, right, to see if I could get the same number of firms at the same time. Match them up.
Okay.
Yeah.
As a final question, I think we were all wondering if you have a publication plan. So you have a book?
Yes.
And out of the book might come one or more papers. We saw that you have presented 2 papers at 2 different conferences,
yes.
2014. Now say that you want to fully exploit the book.
Yes.
How many papers and what would they be about? It could also be one.
Well, I have 2 papers that are a little different. One is more conceptual, and it's about the contingency approach and stuff like that. I don't know if that could be turned into more than a conference paper. One of the comments I got on this model at the conferences I showed it was that it was overly complex for a paper. And that's sort of like an argument we have, right? I think it would be a long paper, but so there's both the approach could be to actually just try and make this model and focus on the last part of it where I really can contribute and see if I can develop a paper from that, or maybe somehow split it up and do it as a 2-way where I start by testing maybe up to the innovativeness points and then add that. And I mean, that could also be an approach that I've discussed with one of my supervisors, having 2 two parts. Yeah.
You have a lot of extra input now, so.
Yeah. But right now, I mean, I've been focused on the defense, so I wouldn't really know which way to start with that.
So, dear Chairman, the committee are really exhausted of questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give him a hand.